All right, strap in, everyone. Today we're going to take a deep dive into ground reference maneuvers.
Ooh, those are fun.
They are. And we'll be using the Airplane Flying Handbook from the FAA as our guide today.
Excellent choice.
I know, right? And you know what? This isn't just for student pilots or anything.
Oh, definitely not.
It's really for anyone, even experienced pilots, because it talks about all those little subtle skills that make all the difference.
Absolutely. The things you might not think about every day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what makes these ground reference maneuvers so special? I mean, it isn't flying all about like instruments and navigation these days?
Well, yeah, those are important, but ground reference maneuvers, they teach you to kind of think spatially,
Yeah.
to really feel the aircraft and to work with the wind instead of fighting it.
Okay, so it's like a different way of thinking about flying then.
It is. It's about that deeper connection to the airplane and the environment.
Hmm. I like that.
In fact, the handbook emphasizes that it's about using all your senses, not just your sight.
Oh, interesting. So like when you're driving a car.
Yeah, exactly. You're feeling the steering wheel, using your peripheral vision,
Right.
listening to the engine.
Totally.
A skilled pilot does the same thing in the air. They use those subtle control pressures, the sound of the wind, even the feeling of their body in the seat to maintain a precise position.
Wow, so it's really about like becoming one with the plane.
You got it.
I like that. Okay, so I'm starting to get the bigger picture here.
Good.
But the handbook also talks about visual illusions. Like, are you telling me my eyes can't be trusted when I'm up in the air?
Not always. You see, our brains are kind of wired to interpret the world in a certain way.
Yeah.
And sometimes that leads to misperceptions, especially in the air.
Hmm.
So imagine you're flying over a field and it's raining.
Okay.
That rain can make things look further away than they really are.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Or like a large building might appear closer than a smaller one at the same distance.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, suddenly judging distances for landing becomes a whole lot trickier.
Yeah, I've definitely misjudged distances while driving in the rain. I never thought about that happening up in the air.
It can happen.
Okay, that's good to know.
It's all about understanding how our perception can be tricked. Pilots are trained to use multiple reference points and to constantly scan the environment so they don't fall for those illusions.
So it's like double checking your work, but with your eyeballs.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the elephant in the cockpit here.
Oh.
The wind.
Oh, yeah.
It's invisible, it's unpredictable, and it seems like it's always trying to push you off course.
Always.
So how do you deal with that?
Well, wind is a constant factor in flying,
Sure.
and understanding how to work with it is crucial.
For sure.
The handbook uses a great analogy. It says, imagine you're trying to steer a boat across a river with a strong current.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
All right, so you can't just point the bow of the boat directly at your destination.
Ah.
You have to angle it upstream to compensate for that current pushing you sideways.
Right, otherwise you end up downstream from where you want to be.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So how do pilots figure out how much to correct for the wind?
Yeah, are there like complex calculations involved?
It's more intuitive than you might think. Pilots use visual cues to judge the amount of drift and make adjustments.
So no fancy math equations up in the air?
Nope. It's all about observation, feel, and responding to what the wind is doing.
So it sounds like being a good pilot is as much about feel as it is about technical knowledge, then.
Absolutely.
Okay, so here's a question. If you're trying to fly a perfect circle in the air, how does the wind affect what that looks like from the ground?
Oh, that's a good one. Imagine trying to draw a perfect circle on a piece of paper while someone is moving that paper around.
Okay, that sounds chaotic.
That's exactly what it's like.
Great.
Trying to fly a circle in the wind. Because the wind affects not just your direction, but also your speed.
Oh, right.
So to maintain that circular path over the ground, pilots need to constantly adjust their bank angle throughout the turn.
Wow. Okay, so there's a lot more to seemingly simple maneuvers than meets the eye?
Yeah.
Then, speaking of maneuvers, the handbook mentions some specific ones, like the rectangular course, turns around a point, and S-turns.
Yeah.
Why are these important?
Each of those maneuvers teaches very specific skills that are crucial for becoming a proficient pilot.
All right, so let's start with the rectangular course. What's that all about?
Okay, so the rectangular course is like a miniature traffic pattern where you practice maintaining a precise position relative to the ground and coordinating your control inputs.
Okay,
It's a building block for things like landing approaches.
so it's all about precision and control.
Yes.
Okay, what about turns around a point? What's the big deal with those?
Turns around a point force you to constantly adjust for the wind's effects on your ground speed and heading.
Okay, so like if you're orbiting a landmark.
Yeah, you need to adjust your bank angle and throttle to stay centered on that point as the wind tries to push you away.
Oh, so it's like a constant balancing act.
It is.
What about S-turns? Are they just for like showing off?
Not at all.
Okay, good.
S-turns are all about developing those precise control and wind correction skills.
Okay.
Imagine you're flying along an imaginary line on the ground.
Okay.
To perform an S-turn, you weave back and forth across that line, constantly adjusting your bank angle and anticipating the wind's effects to make smooth, coordinated turns. It helps you develop a feel for how the wind is going to influence your flight path.
Okay, so even seemingly fancy maneuvers have a very practical purpose.
They do.
Okay, I got it. But the handbook says that the real test of mastery lies in the eights.
Oh, yeah.
What makes them so special?
Eights are where all those skills we've been talking about, the precision, the wind correction, coordination, they all come together. And there's eights along a road, eights across a road, and the ultimate challenge, eights on pylons.
Eights on pylons. Oh boy, that sounds intense.
It is.
What makes it the ultimate ground reference maneuver?
All right, so picture 2 pylons on the ground.
Okay.
You have to fly a figure-8 pattern around them, but here's the catch. You're not just flying a pattern, you're also constantly adjusting your altitude to keep the pylon appearing in a specific spot relative to the airplane.
Hold on, adjusting altitude. I thought we were talking about ground reference maneuvers, not like aerial acrobatics.
That's what makes it so challenging.
Oh boy.
There's this concept called pivotal altitude.
Pivotal altitude.
Yes, it's a specific altitude where, if you're turning correctly, the pylon will appear to stay in the same spot relative to your plane.
Oh, wow.
It's like finding the sweet spot where everything balances perfectly.
This is blowing my mind. I'm starting to see why ground reference maneuvers are so much more than just basic flying skills.
It is.
But unfortunately, we're going to have to pause our deep dive here for now.
Yeah.
But don't worry, folks, there's much more to explore.
Oh, yeah.
In the meantime, dear listener, imagine yourself in the cockpit, feeling the wind on your face, the controls in your hand, and those pylons on the ground.
Can you picture it?
Can you picture that intricate dance required to hold them perfectly in place as you maneuver through the air?
It's pretty cool.
It is. Join us next time as we continue our exploration of ground reference maneuvers and uncover even more fascinating insights from the Airplane Flying Handbook. And we're back, continuing our deep dive into ground reference maneuvers, and last time things were getting pretty interesting.
They were.
We left off talking about eights on pylons and this whole pivotal altitude thing.
Right. Pivotal altitude is really key to mastering that maneuver, and the handbook actually addresses some common misconceptions about it.
Oh, really? Like,
Yeah.
what? I'm still trying to wrap my head around it all.
One of the biggest misconceptions is about the reference point you use for holding the pylon in position.
Okay.
A lot of pilots think it's about keeping their wingtip pointed at the pylon.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. The wingtip is like your pointer finger in the sky, right?
It seems logical, but the handbook is very clear that it's not about the wingtip itself. It's about focusing on an imaginary line that runs parallel to the airplane's lateral axis.
So basically like a line straight out from your shoulders. So instead of focusing on one specific point, it's more like a feeling of alignment with the pylon.
Yes, precisely. Like an extension of your own sense of balance and orientation.
That's interesting.
And this reference line, it might be slightly different for each pilot.
Oh, right, because everyone sees things a little differently.
And even for different seats in the same airplane.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, your seating position could change your viewpoint.
Absolutely.
Okay, so how do you actually hold that pylon steady in your line of sight? Is it just like a matter of intense concentration?
Well, it involves making very small, precise adjustments.
Okay.
Remember, the pivotal altitude, it changes with your ground speed.
Right.
So you're always making these micro adjustments to your altitude based on how the pylon is drifting.
Okay.
If it drifts backwards, you need to climb a bit. If it drifts forward, you descend.
Oh, wow. So it's like this constant dance between altitude, airspeed, and bank angle.
It is a constant dance.
No wonder the FAA handbook calls eights on pylons the most advanced ground reference maneuver.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about how challenging it is, but what's the real benefit? Like, why go through all this trouble?
It's about taking your flying skills to that next level, you know.
Yeah.
You might not be performing eights on pylons every day,
Probably not.
but the skills you develop from it are so valuable.
Okay, how so?
It refines your control inputs,
Okay.
your ability to just sense the airplane's movement,
Yep.
and it really takes your precision flying to a whole new level.
So it's like training for a marathon even if you never plan to run one.
Exactly. You're pushing your limits and building up your overall fitness as a pilot.
I like that. And it's not just stick and rudder skills either, is it?
Nope. Eights on pylons also force you to master something called division of attention.
Oh, meaning you have to like juggle multiple things at once.
Exactly. You're constantly monitoring your altitude, airspeed, heading, bank angle, the position of the pylon, all while scanning for other aircraft and anything else happening around you.
Oh, wow.
It's like a mental workout
Right.
that sharpens your awareness and decision-making abilities.
So it really makes you a safer pilot overall.
It does.
That's fascinating. It's like those brain training games that claim to improve your cognitive skills, but with much higher stakes.
Yeah, and that's what the handbook really emphasizes.
Okay.
Ground reference maneuvers, especially eights on pylons, they're about honing the skills and judgment that make you a better and safer pilot no matter what you fly or where you go.
That's really cool. So we've established that this is like serious skill building stuff.
It is.
But I'm curious, what are some common pitfalls pilots encounter when they're learning this maneuver? Like, I bet there are some gotchas along the way that we should warn our listeners about.
Oh, there are definitely a few.
Okay, like what?
Well, as you might imagine, over-controlling is a big one.
Okay.
It's easy to get caught up trying to make everything perfect.
Yeah.
And you start making these large, jerky movements with the controls.
Especially when you're first learning, right?
Especially when you're first learning.
Yeah.
It's like oversteering in a car when you're trying to correct your course.
Right, you make a small correction, but then you overcompensate in the other direction, and suddenly you're all over the place.
Exactly. The key with eights on pylons is smoothness and subtlety.
So take a deep breath, relax, and trust those little tiny inputs to do their job.
Right. Don't fight the airplane.
I got it. What else?
Another common mistake is fixating too much on the pylon itself.
Oh, okay.
Remember, it's not about staring intently at that one spot.
Right.
It's about maintaining that imaginary line parallel to your shoulders and using your peripheral vision to track the pylon's position within that line.
Right. So it's not like those magic eye pictures where you stare until the 3D image pops out.
Exactly. Keep your eyes moving, scan the whole environment, and trust your peripheral vision.
Okay. So what about altitude control? Any tips there?
Altitude control, that's a big one.
Okay.
Pilots often try to chase the pylon by making these abrupt changes in altitude.
So instead of those smooth, subtle adjustments, they're bouncing up and down like a yo-yo?
Exactly, and that can lead to all sorts of issues, not to mention making your passengers feel a bit queasy.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So, smooth and steady wins the race, especially when it comes to altitude control.
Gotcha. Anything else?
The handbook also mentions the temptation to use the rudder pedals to force the pylon into position.
Oh, okay.
It might seem like a quick fix,
Yeah.
but it can actually throw off your coordinated flight, which can be dangerous, especially at low altitudes.
So bottom line, keep your feet off the rudder pedals unless you're specifically making coordinated turns.
That's right. The rudder is for coordination, not compensation.
Got it. Anything else we should watch out for?
There's one more common mistake that's a little more subtle.
Okay.
Pilots sometimes rely too much on their altimeter to judge their altitude instead of using their visual reference to the pylon.
Wait, so you're saying I shouldn't trust my instruments?
In this case, it's about trusting your eyes and your feel more than the altimeter.
Okay.
Remember, the pivotal altitude is constantly changing based on your ground speed. Your altimeter might tell you you're at the correct altitude, but if the pylon is drifting forward, you need to descend even if it says you're at the right height.
So it's about integrating those visual cues with your instruments.
Yeah.
And trusting your judgment.
Exactly. It's about developing that intuitive connection between your senses, the airplane, and the environment.
Makes sense.
That's what makes eights on pylons such a rewarding and challenging maneuver.
This has been super eye-opening learning about all the nuances of eights on pylons.
Glad to hear it.
We've busted some myths, highlighted common mistakes, and really explored the skill and precision required.
For sure.
But before we bring this landing in for a smooth finish,
Okay.
I'm curious about the real-world applications of these skills.
That's a great question.
Like, while perfecting eights on pylons sounds impressive,
Yeah.
I'm wondering how it all comes together in the real world of flying, you know?
We'll dive into that in our final segment.
Okay, perfect.
We'll explore why mastering ground reference maneuvers, from the simplest to the most complex, are so crucial for becoming a well-rounded and confident pilot.
Awesome. Can't wait. Well, folks, join us next time as we wrap up our exploration of ground reference maneuvers and those aha moments that make flying such a rewarding and fascinating endeavor. Welcome back to our deep dive. We're exploring ground reference maneuvers.
We've covered a lot, you know, for basic wind drift and those visual illusions to those tricky eights on pylons.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
It really has. But now let's talk about the real-world impact of these maneuvers. Like, how do these seemingly specialized skills actually help pilots in practical situations?
It's all about building a solid foundation of airmanship.
Okay.
These maneuvers really teach you to understand how the airplane interacts with the wind, the ground, and everything around it.
So it's more than just a set of skills then. It's like learning the language of the sky. Exactly. And on a very practical level, ground reference maneuvers make you better at handling crosswind landings, maintaining a precise course in challenging conditions, and even improve your awareness in busy airspace.
That makes sense. It's like a basketball player practicing dribbling drills. They might not be dribbling through a crowd of defenders in every game, but those drills make them much more agile and prepared.
That's a great analogy. Mastering ground reference maneuvers gives you that heightened sense of control and precision, making you a safer and more confident pilot overall.
So it's not just about impressing your flight instructor.
Nope.
It's about developing skills that could really make a difference when it matters most.
Precisely. Imagine you're coming in for a landing and there's this gusty crosswind pushing you off course.
Oh, yeah.
The precision and control you've developed from practicing ground reference maneuvers, especially those S-turns and eights, will help you make those corrections and touch down smoothly.
Yeah, now that you mention it, I can see how those seemingly isolated skills would come into play during a real landing. It's like building up this toolbox of techniques.
Exactly. And the benefits go beyond just the technical aspects, too.
Really?
Ground reference maneuvers also demand a certain level of discipline, focus, attention to detail that will benefit you in all areas of aviation.
So it's about developing that mental sharpness that any good pilot needs.
You got it. You're honing your senses, trusting your intuition, developing a feel for the airplane that goes beyond just reading instruments.
It's like becoming one with the machine, feeling its movements, anticipating its responses.
Yeah, there's a certain finesse to it, an artistry, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, and that's what makes this whole exploration of ground reference maneuvers so fascinating. It's not just about the nuts and bolts of flying, it's about the deeper connection between the pilot and the airplane, the wind and the earth.
Well said.
It's about pushing your limits, expanding your perception, and discovering the true potential of flight.
As we wrap up our deep dive into ground reference maneuvers, I encourage you, dear listener, to keep this sense of wonder with you, to appreciate the skill involved in even the simplest maneuvers. Whether you're a seasoned pilot or just dreaming of taking to the skies, remember there's always more to learn, more to discover, and more to master.
Beautifully put. And who knows, maybe one day you'll find yourself up there, tracing those perfect eights on pylons, experiencing that incredible harmony between you and the machine.
The sky's the limit.
It is. Well, folks, this has been The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time for another exciting journey into the world of knowledge and discovery.